bagwa marokoti yoka bagwa marokoti ngwaban sej.
The history of Jamaican diaspora and people is much deeper than what you think you know. This is the story of the indigenous Taíno people on the island of Jamaica and to what is known today as their triumphant survival. Currently, with a population just under 3 million, Jamaica, being the third largest island in the Caribbean Sea, is known as the melting pot of many different races and people around the globe. On the island, you will find ancestral history from South America, West Africa, Europe, India, China, the Middle East, and the list goes on. But within the entire Caribbean, Jamaica remains one of the least known islands historically. Because of the lack of prehistoric knowledge, what I will share with you today is a small speck of the untapped history of the island and people. As far back as history and manuscript tells us, Jamaica, originally named Jamaica by our indigenous ancestors, is rich with history, struggle for freedom, sense of pride, culture, hardship, and beauty. Long before Jamaica's transition to independence, before the British claimed their land, before the importation of African slave labor after the Spanish invaded their territory, before their resistance and uprising of the Maroons, and before colonialism, the island was inhabited for hundreds of years. The very earliest known and recorded inhabitants of Jamaica was found during the period of approximately 600 AD of the indigenous Osteroid people and culture, informally and respectfully referred to as Redware people. Well, why are they called the Redware people? Well, simply because that is literally all the historians know about them. The evidence found of them is traced to red clay pots. It appears they developed an elaborate and distinctive artistic expression in pottery, bone, shell and stone, to which was found in the archaeological sites around Alligator Pond in Manchester Parish and Little River in St. Anne Parish. A couple of centuries later, roughly 800 AD, it is believed that a second wave of inhabitants occurred by the indigenous Taínos people. Although the Redware people predated the Taíno people with two distinct culture, while not 100% proven, it is believed that over time the Redware natives became assimilated into that of the Taíno through social and cultural interaction. Known as very skilled farmers and navigators, the Taíno people is said to have migrated to Jamaica from the northern coast of South America. Originating from the region of Guyana and Venezuela, they sailed northwards in their dugout canoes, large enough for more than 100 paddlers. Researchers believe that the cultural ancestry of the Taínos people can be traced to the ancestors of the Arawaks throughout South America. The Arawaks were concentrated along the lowlands of the Orinoco River in South America. Arawak comes from the name given by the Europeans at a very early age of the Columbian era. Manuscript says that as early as 250 BC, the Taínos, also known as the Arawaks, began to explore the limits of their technology. They settled on what they thought were uninhabited islands and fully developed throughout the Caribbean. They made their way to Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, the Virgin Island, and the island of Hispaniola, to which in this day and age is divided into two countries, the Republic of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The original Taíno tribe settled near the coastline of Jamaica and had already developed a distinct language and culture, but over time they also began to speak a separate dialect of the Arawakian language group. When the Taínos people arrived, making Jamaica their permanent home, it was deeply forested with a wealth of plants and animals. As we know, Jamaica lies in the hurricane belt of the Atlantic Ocean, and because of this, the island sometimes suffers significant storm damage. So for obvious reasons, the Taínos people named the land Jamaica, meaning land of wood and water or land of springs. Even though Christopher Columbus called it Santiago when he landed on the island, the name persisted as Jamaica. Later, when the European settlers landed on Jamaica, they cut down the great timber trees for building and ship supplies, and cleared the plains, savannas, and mountain slopes for intense agricultural cultivation. What's great about Jamaica is the many shades of people throughout. The Taíno people had a bronze brown to olive skin complexion with thick straight dark brown to black hair. Their facial features were high cheekbones, dark brown eyes with what appeared to be a flat face and prominent nose. The very noticeable physical feature of the Taínos was their flattened forehead. You see, the reason for this was the common practice that took place during infancy, where a board was tied to the child's forehead, resulting in them having a flattened forehead. During this period of time, most did not use clothing except for married women who would wear a short apron called nagwa. They wore earrings, nose rings, and necklaces, which were sometimes made of gold. Both men and women adorned themselves with feathers, ornaments made of gold, shells, and other semi-precious stones. The Taínos women also said to have been very skilled in farming, growing crops, and the rearing of animals to provide food. Staple food included cassava, yam, potato, beans, squash, peanuts, pepper, wild plants, fish, shellfish, birds, and other small animals, most of which are common food in the Jamaican culture to this very day. Throughout their village, members of the family slept in cotton hammocks or simply on banana leaves. The general population lived in large circular buildings called bohíos, constructed with wooden poles, woven straw, and palm leaves. Most, if not all, the Taínos men were hunters and fishermen. They used bows and arrows for hunting and developed the use of poisons on their arrowheads. The only domesticated animals that they had were actual dogs and occasionally parrots, used as a decoy to wild birds within range of hunters. In addition to ceremonial purposes, while traveling and hunting, they would often apply paint to their body and face. It was also a way to uniquely identify their tribe. The Taíno people had an elaborate and well-constructed system of communities, agriculture, and religious beliefs and rituals. By the time Christopher Columbus arrived, it is estimated that there were over 200 villages across the island. The Taínos believed that Zimis, gods of both sexes, represented by both human and animal forms, provided protection. Religious worship was done through song and dancing in the village court during special festivals of Thanksgiving. The Taíno people lived in what we now call a theocratic kingdom structure, with a tribal chieftain of the people. Their complex and distinct social order consists of subordinates to the caciques. Caciques meaning chief, king, or prince. The cacique had many privileges, such as having small kingdoms, receiving the best food, living in a larger house, and having as many as 10 to 20 wives. The cacique's structural function was to keep the welfare of the village by assigning daily work and making sure everyone had equal share. The relatives of the caciques lived together in large houses in the center of the village made of mud, straw, and palm leaves. Polygamy was practiced throughout their community, and outside of the chieftain, most men had up to 3 wives. The Taíno people had a very gentle culture, and they lived in harmony with the land. It was characterized by happiness, friendliness, and a very peaceful structure that was in place until the turn of the 16th century, when the Europeans arrived. In search of gold on May 5, 1494, Christopher Columbus, the Italian explorer, sailed west to get to the East Indies and came upon the West Indies, where he landed in Jamaica. On his arrival at St. Anne's Bay with his crew, including the Spaniards, Columbus sighted the Taínos Indians inhabiting the island. The Taíno were very friendly and welcoming, but for obvious reasons, it is said that Columbus experienced hostility from the people overall. The reality is they were very protective of their land and community. Columbus himself also said in manuscripts he was impressed by the beauty and peaceful nature of the Taínos. You see, what history books avoid to explain is that Columbus and his crew of men killed and enslaved many of the Taínos people, treated them with extreme violence and brutality, hence the reason the Taínos people naturally respond with revolt over time. Columbus and the Spaniards first settled on the northern coast of Jamaica, which is now known as the parish of St. Anne. There they built a town called Sevilla Nueva, or New Seville. Afterwards, they moved to the southern part of the island and built the town of St. Jago de la Vega, which is St. James of the Plain, which is still called Spanish Town. Throughout the years, Columbus and his men forced the Taínos of Jamaica to work for the sake of profit, and over the years sent thousands upon thousands of Taíno natives to Spain to be sold. Many of them committed suicide and died during the journey. The natives who weren't sold into slavery were forced to look for gold in mines and work on plantations. In 1509, Jamaica became a colony of Spain under the Spanish monarchy. Because the Spanish continued to take from the land and was not building it up, by approximately 1540 to 1550, Jamaica was under the license from the Columbus family as a personal estate. Realizing there is absolutely little gold and silver on the island, the Columbus estate and Spaniard continued to do nothing, absolutely nothing to develop Jamaica, but instead it literally sucked the life out of the small and prosperous island. You see, what's devastating about the history of the Taínos people was their communities and how they became almost extinct. They were decimated by exposure to diseases. This is due to the lack of immunity to the bacteria and diseases such as smallpox, measles, influenza, mumps, chickenpox, pneumonia, which were all brought to the island by Columbus and his men. The violent destruction of the Taínos cannot be overstated. The enslaved were regularly whipped for minor offenses, for claims such as stealing food to eat from being hungry. Such offense is said to have resulted in cutting off a Taíno's body parts, such as their nose, ear, and even their hand. You see, Columbus took and gifted Taíno women to his crewmen, who would violently beat and rape them. Taíno women were also taken captive to be raped, and young girls, as young as 9 and 10, were sold for sexual slavery. The impact of the Europeans' greed of wealth from resources like sugar, tobacco, and cotton resulted in them enslaving Taíno people, destroying as much as 90% of the population. While their population sadly diminished, dying in large numbers, many of the Taíno people escaped into the forested mountains. During this period, the next wave of enslaved people occurred. African slaves were shipped to the colony and forced to continue the grueling physical labor. The first African slaves arrived in Jamaica in approximately 1513. As with the Taíno people, many of the African slaves revolted, resisted their Spanish and English colonial administrations, and then also fled to the Blues and John Crow Mountains, being removed from more populated areas that lined the coast. Taking refuge in the distant mountains allowed them to create a network of hiding places, trails, and settlements. It is believed that both Taíno escaped settlers, West African runaways, came together, eventually intermarrying to lay the foundation for the formation of the Maroon settlements. The name Maroon comes from the Spanish word cimarron, roughly translated as wild or untamed. The most known Maroons were the West Africans, who were bought mainly from the Akan tribe. Over time, the Maroons came to control large inner areas of Jamaica, and from their hideouts they would regularly descend to raid the plantation. The uprising and courageous resistance of the Maroons threatened the British sugar plantation industry. Their efforts included plantation raids and the freeing of many slaves. The Maroons successfully waged war against the British colonial rule that resulted in the establishment of an independent community in western Jamaica, one of several across the island. While many of the Taíno people died and their population decreased significantly, they did not become extinct. Their bloodlines still live on as part of the mixed ethnicity throughout Jamaica. To this day, there are many on the island and throughout the Caribbean that identify as the Taínos. Let's not forget that modern Jamaica is built on a historical legacy of genocide perpetrated against the island's indigenous people, on the experience of over 300 years of slavery and oppression suffered by the Jamaicans. While most of the people now in modern-day Jamaica consist of African descendants, the depiction of the original indigenous Taíno on the Jamaican coat of arms pay homage to them being the first people of the land. The legacy of the Taínos and other indigenous people is encouraged to be honored through self-education, a commitment to learning about the natives to where you live and visit, unlearning and demanding change. Educate yourself about the structural discrimination and intentional elimination of native tribes. Acknowledge your relationship with your land while also acknowledging the immense damage of capitalism. It has been taught and believed that the Taínos became extinct. However, despite the devastation of the early colonial era, the bloodline still lives on in their rivalrous communities throughout the Caribbean and various parts of the world. Taínos' descendants has passed on their knowledge, culture, tradition, and their history of survival to this very day. Thank you for being open-minded. With knowledge comes understanding, and with understanding comes perspective. Please continue to seek and embrace your history, which provides us with the critical tools to cultivate growth and change for the present and future, which we thrive to do on this platform. Please like if you found this video educational, and of course, subscribe and share. Until next time, peace king, peace queen. Wabanse Shatavira O Kama Yokahu Atabe Taíno ti Yokahu